And tonight's Top Gear, the scariest car I've ever driven, a 6.5-litre Mercedes SLK. The car that changed the face of Grand Prix racing, Jim Clark's Lotus 49. And coming in from the cold, unloved Soviet socialist rubbish. Hello. I'm currently driving down the motorway at 240 kilometres an hour, which works out at about 150. Tell you what, I think I'm going to go a little bit faster. Now, if you were to buy an ordinary Mercedes S-Class, it would be electronically limited to 155 miles an hour. But this one isn't ordinary. It's been breathed on by a tuning company called Brabus, and it's capable, and I hope you're sitting down for this, of 200 miles an hour. Germany, where people think they have the God-given right to drive as fast as they like, has become the tuning capital of the world. I mean, you really have just got to see this engine. Now, the standard car has a 6-litre V12. This has an unlimited 582 horsepower, 7.3-litre V12. It's very nice, very impressive, but let's be honest, the standard S-Class is fast enough in the first place. That, on the other hand, is not. The ordinary Mercedes SLK is a very nice little car, but its miserable 2.3-litre engine belongs in a kitchen utensil, not a sports car. This, though, is the 178-mile-an-hour Brabus SLK, which comes with a 6.5-litre V8.
I've been driving all night, my hands wet on the wheel.
Right. Let's see what this thing can do. Oh, good heavens above. That is X-rated performance.
And it's 4:30 and I'm shifting gear.
I've never understood that lyric, and it makes even less sense in here where you've got an automatic box, but don't be dismayed. You've no time to worry about gears when your head and the headrest have become an amorphous blob and the world's just gone into wobble vision. Ooh-hoo-hoo-hoo. This is one quick car.
We've got a thing that's a cold red love. We've got a wave in here. Red love.
Right, I'm doing 30 miles an hour now, and now I'm going 50, and now I'm going 70. In the mid-ranges, this thing is faster than an Aston Martin Vantage.
She sends a comfort coming in from above. We don't need no ladder at all. We've got a thing that's cold, red I love. We've got a light in the sky.
I'm sorry to keep banging on about the performance, but that really is what Brabus is all about. Their 7.3-litre E-Class is actually in the Guinness Book of Records as the fastest saloon car in the world. And this, too, is just sheer, unadulterated power. That and a soundtrack that can knock down tower blocks. But look, Mercedes designed this car to be safe in a supermarket car park, not at Mach 2. But don't worry, Brabus has upgraded the wheels and tyres. The suspension is completely changed. It's lowered and stiffened. And the original brakes were put neatly in the bin and replaced with discs the size of Devon. In fact, they replaced so much that Brabus is now certified by the German authorities as a manufacturer. This car doesn't even have any Mercedes badges on it, but don't worry. I mean, just look at this interior. The dials are colour-coded to match the interior trim. The handbrake has an aluminium lever. There's 22 kilometres of stitching in those carpets. But if the quality of the work in here is replicated on the undersides, it should be all right. Let me put it this way. It's rumoured that 5 Mercedes board directors drive Brabus tweaked cars. Michael Schumacher has one too. There's a bloke trying to come through on the inside here. Get out of it! Actually, in aggressive manoeuvres like that, you do find a car's Achilles heel. It may be stupendously fast and nicely refined, but it lacks sensitivity. Through the corners, it's no Ferrari, which is a shame, because at £120,000, it's £20,000 more than a 355. But then, this can do something that would leave the little Ferrari gasping. This is one of those very rare cars that appeals on every level. I, for instance, love the style and the noise. Tiff would be impressed by the power and the handling. And of course, Quentin disappears off to the lavatory with a grin on his face if anyone so much as mentions the words Mercedes and Benz. I've fallen head over heels in love with the Brabus SLK, but Germany is the wrong environment. Driving fast on motorways is neither big nor clever, so I'm off to where this car can really shine. The south of France. Should take about 20 minutes.
"30 years ago, one May morning in 1967, the Team Lotus Transporter arrived here at the Snetterton Circuit, just 14 miles from its base in Hethel, near Norwich. And the car that the mechanics rolled out onto this tarmac was one that would revolutionise the world of Grand Prix racing. The car was the Lotus 49, another giant step forward from Lotus chief Colin Chapman, probably the most gifted racing car designer of all time. The key to the 49's success was its engine, a brand new Cosworth V8 paid for by Ford. At £100,000, it was probably the biggest bargain in the history of motorsport. Christened the DFV, standing for double 4-valve, it was unique in being the first engine to form part of the structure of the car. The designer was one half of Cosworth, Keith Duckworth.
If you're going to make a V8, there's no way that you can sensibly get a chassis, a tubeless structure around the engine or pods down the side. So you then decide that, well, we could do with making the engine as short as possible, and it doesn't matter how wide it is, but you need it short so you can get your fuel tank immediately in front of it.
Now we get to the interesting bit. We built the engine onto the car, as you can see. Yes. And now we built the rest of the suspension on the back of the engine, because the engine itself is forming part of the structure of the car. Right. And, of course, it holds it all together. Now, if we can get that mounted on there, get those picking up on those bolts, and we hang the rear suspension on the back there, we've got a complete structure right through the car.
The things that Keith designs, he designs very carefully, and they do assemble, and usually work first time, which did enable us to get the engine ready to run on the test bed almost as soon as the last small pieces were finished manufacture.
With Lotus #1 driver Jim Clark out of Britain in tax exile, it fell to Graham Hill to give the car its first run at Snetterton, a moment recorded by the Ford film unit.
But he liked it.
And Graham's first impressions?
Well, it's such a poke. Good. Not a bad old tool.
"30 years on, we brought Hill's car out of retirement from the National Motor Museum at Bewley to bask once again in the Snetterton sunshine. By the end of its life, spoilers and fat tyres would clutter the 49's simple shape. But in 1967 specification, it has to be one of the most beautiful racing cars ever made. Even more so, when it comes alive. I donned the period costume of open-face helmet and goggles to truly appreciate the occasion, and I also had to get used to another sign of the times. There were no seat belts.
Straight away, this Lotus 49 just feels so light and nimble. It goes when it points. This was in the days before the big aerodynamic downforce. Cars relied on mechanical grip, so there wasn't really much of it. And with 400 horsepower, things could get pretty lively.
Hill, Lotus Ford. And Jim Clark, again, first on the grid.
Jim Clark would lead all 10 Grand Prix that he raced in with the green and yellow Lotus 49 and win 5 of them. Tragically, he would be killed in a Formula 2 race in April of 1968 before he could add to his 2 world titles. So it would be Hill who took his second crown that year, 28 years before young Damon would follow in his footsteps. It was Hill who was on pole position for the 49's debut at Zandvoort in Holland, with Clark back in 8th, having never driven the car before practice. But Hill would break down, leaving Clark to score the Lotus Ford's historic debut victory. When pushed nearer the limit, I could appreciate even more the artistry of the drivers of this era, who caressed the cars along a fine line without the aid of the massive grip created by modern aerodynamic downforce. But my first impression? Like the man said, it's got some poke. With Clark gone, Hill took up the mantle of team leader as the glorious green and yellow gave way to the dawning of the commercial age and the first of the flying fag packets. Jochen Rindt used a 49 on the way to his title in 1970, and by then a growing number of the opposition were using the Ford DFV power plant, including Jackie Stewart, who won the title for Tyrrell in 69, 71 and 73.
The DFV would remain competitive for an incredible 16 years, powering 12 world champions to their titles and winning an amazing 154 Grand Prix. 12 of those were won by the Lotus 49, a car that would remain competitive for 4 seasons and will be driven by 5 of motor racing's world champions. By any reckoning, the Lotus 49 must be one of the greatest racing cars ever.
There was a time when off-roaders used to be special. If you drove a Range Rover, you had some serious juice. Old money, country seats, shooting sticks and deerstalkers. But not anymore. There are 4x4s decorating the driveways of every Barrett housing estate. In fact, they're being driven by all sorts of people.
And the reason why we bought them all in the first place was they made us feel special, made us feel different. We liked that exalted imperial driving position, that buccaneering, get-through-anything spirit of adventure. But alas, they are all over the place now. Most are as interesting and as shapely as a haversack. Let's face it, 4x4s are now as common as the Spice Girls. Except one, that is. The Jeep Cherokee.
With a bloodline that stretches back to General Eisenhower and World War II, the Jeep's credentials are gilt-edged. It even inspired the venerable Land Rover. But 50 years on, the latest incarnation isn't just the most distinctive and separate off-roader on the market, it also makes one of the best second-hand 4x4s money can buy. Let me show you some sort of commitment here. This is one 4x4 I would dearly love to own. I like it an awful lot. I like its epic visibility, its wondrously comfortable seats, its grunty 4-litre engine, its seamless 4-speed automatic, the fact that it's rare, that it isn't Japanese, and it doesn't handle like a paddle steamer. But most of all, I respect it because of the way it's built. You see, in the 4.5 years the Jeep Cherokee has been around, there have been absolutely no horror stories. I could put it up on a ramp, poke about with a screwdriver, and show you all the oily bits. But there would be no point. There would be nothing to say, because very little ever goes wrong, breaks, or falls off. These things are built, well, they're built like, Jeeps. Mind you, there are a few niggles. Even though you drive like the district nurse in your stocking feet, you'll only get around 20 miles to the gallon. The rear accommodation isn't brilliant either. The spare wheel should really live here or underneath the floor, but it doesn't. It lives there, standing straight up to attention. You could say these alloy wheels aren't the prettiest in the world. And come to think of it, neither is the dashboard. It's all a bit, Detroit, circa 1975. But on the plus side, you do get an awful lot for your money. If you go for the 4-litre Limited, you'll get niceties like electric front seats, leather trim, cruise control, air conditioning, plus the sure and certain knowledge that you're not going to break down. So, if you want your gully climber to be better built than a Discovery or a Range Rover, hold its value longer than a Frontiera or a 4-track, and have a classier image than a Trooper or a Shogun, then here it is, the Jeep Cherokee, the most flattering 4x4 by far.
It's a sad fact, but the people behind the Iron Curtain never really set their sights too high.
Oh! Это твоя лада?
Да, классная, да.
О, тебя очень повезло. На такие машины записано 10 лет вперед. Какие дверцы, колеса. О, настоящий пластик. Эй, ты ведь такой машине очень нравится девушкам, эй? Да. Сейчас моя машина, Velorex, стоила копейки. Я купил ее и Квентин Вилсонович.
Господи, то bien дорого. Technology мир.
That is the sort of conversation you would have heard quite often in the bad old communist times. Because believe it or not, there were cars out there worse than the Lada.
Well, I'm sorry, but this really is pretty bad skin. The body is vinyl stretched over a metal frame, but it's so flimsy it feels like you're driving around in a wet bank packet.
If it's a choice between driving this and working down the salt mines, then give me that pickaxe. Because the very least a car should do is go and stop. And this doesn't want to do either.
You don't so much press the brakes as write a letter to them, asking them if they wouldn't mind stopping the car sometime this week.
Karl Marx gave us communism. Well, I wouldn't mind giving him a lift in this and saying, you got any more bright ideas, mate?
What's more shocking than the atrociousness of this car is the fact that it's owned by an Englishman living in England.
And he's not alone. For years, these good folk have been diving into the Eastern Bloc and laying down good money to some of the most hopeless vehicles of all time. In fact, so fond are they of commie cars, they formed a club, the USSR, the Unloved Soviet Socialist Register.
The club's got about 100 members, and we've got every kind of Eastern Bloc car, from the weird, the wonderful, to the fairly boring. I think we're all quite honest about the fact that they may not be termed classic cars, insofar as, you know, some of them don't look particularly attractive. They're agricultural in their engineering. But that's one of the joys, in that the Trabi has only got 7 moving parts. Therefore, not much is going to go wrong.
One of them isn't the wheels, is it?
Precisely. It's not a big club, and never will be. But I wouldn't want it to be a big club, because then we'd start the MG problem and become boring.
Right. And when those lovely MG chaps come a-calling, Julian's best chance of a getaway will be in this huge 5.5-litre V8 Chaika. The Chaika was the perfect example of Russian communism in action. That is, all men are created equal. It's just that some have infinitely better clothes and houses and cars. During its 20-year life, only 2,000 Chaikas were built. And when it came to styling, the communists were more conservative than Norman Tebbit. This model looks straight out of the 50s, but in fact, it was made in 1976. While the party boss sat in the back sipping a Molotov cocktail, it was left to the poor old chauffeur up the front to deal with all the aggro. I mean, for a start, you had to be a shot putter to steer it. It does have power steering. I'm just not sure where it is or what it's doing. The stereo comes complete with its own missile launchers, and you've got enough channels to get radio labor camp in Siberia. But, even more worrying, the bonnet release says kaput in Russian.
It's been accused of being a late 50s Packard, but it was in fact all designed and made in-house in Russia, although the design team did apparently buy a couple of Packards and a Chrysler for study. Wouldn't possibly copy it, of course.
Yeah, why would they do that? Because goddamn Americans, you know, they were the enemy, they were the missile pointers. Why would they want to copy?
So I suppose it's the glamour. The glamour, really.
Relatively.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I love it. It's like nothing else that you ever see on the road here. I don't go out and see myself coming the other way, which is nice. It drives extremely well. You get it on a motorway and it wafts along. Marvellous. Which is great until something breaks. And then you don't really go to Halfords and get a bit for it. You've got to contact your friends in Latvia and so on.
Or even easier, call your friend in Surrey, the Comrade mechanic who specialises in keeping Lenin's limos on the road.
We have to get piston rings that are different sizes and grind them down to fit pistons that have to have the bores sleeved. The tyres you can get at the moment. Bearings you can sort of copy with metric equivalents, hopefully, but on the Volga here you can't get any bearings for that. So you just have to literally modify, machine and skim and design and keep them running.
This Volga of yours, it's a pretty fancy capitalist colour, isn't it?
It's because they painted it that colour so as it didn't get vandalised when it was left at Riga docks, because a Volga like this would have been used basically by the KGB or the Special Police Group. So that would have been black originally, and if people in Latvia had seen that by the docks in black, it would probably have come back in pieces.
Because if a black Volga turns up at your house unannounced, it's time to start packing your thermals for Siberia.
Time to go out the back entrance, yeah.
Have you got respect for the Russians and their car making?
Yeah, I have in actual fact, because the vehicles were built to take very hard road conditions, very severe winters, and they had to be driven by people who hadn't got any mechanical knowledge at all, because they weren't given mechanical knowledge. If your car breaks down, there's no garage, there is nobody to help. You either get it going or you'll freeze.
I really like this club because they're so tongue-in-cheek. But the trouble is, now that communism's dead, the Russians are going through their Volga nouveau riche stage. So, what kind of cars are they going to be collecting in 10 years' time? I fear for the worst.
Back in the USSR. Well, the Ukraine girl